Hey, Tov. Happy Tu B'Shvat, everyone. So we started talking last night about Parashat Haman, not Haman from Megillat Esther, but Parashat Haman, the man that fell in Parashat Shavua. You'd be surprised how many people actually get confused. But so we spoke about the skula, maybe or lack thereof, of reciting Parashat Haman once a year. We saw the sources that Shulchan Aruch mentions and Mishnah Berurah explains that there are those who have a custom to recite Parashat Haman every day, and the idea was this is not a magical formula. It's not some incantation that we say and magically we'll get parnasa. But if you read the parasha and you learn the parasha and understand the messages that come out of it, so then that will strengthen your emunah, and that will strengthen your belief that your parnasa comes from Hashem, and that will encourage you to act accordingly. And as a result, you'll merit to be a person, hopefully, who will have parnasa. That's the real skula. I was thinking as well. We find this many different places, many different skulot. We could spend a lot of time talking about it. But another one that's well known that everybody says on Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So there's Tfilat Hashla Kadosh. The Shla was a beautiful tfilah for one's children and one's descendants, that they should carry on in the ways of Torah mitzvot, etc. And he writes that a person should always pray for their children, should always pray for their descendants. And he says a particularly auspicious time to do this is Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Sivan, a few days before Matan Torah, the time when we have Chag HaShavuot. It's a time when naturally one should be thinking and reflecting about the Torah and our connection to it and how we accept it and how we pass it on to the next generation. So that's a good time to pray for it. But really, you should pray every day. So many people think, okay, get to Erev Rosh Chodesh and you have you've got a stopwatch and you say, before Shkia, you have to make sure you get the words in. Maybe there's value to that, but there's probably more value in saying the tefillah every day, and that's just the time. If a person never says the tefillah and Erev Rosh Chodesh, they're going to remember to say it. Okay, so better to say it then than not to say it at all. But again, I think the idea with many of these things is that what's the deeper message, the deeper meaning behind it? What's it encouraging us to think and to achieve and to become? So let's talk about a different aspect today of Parashat Haman. Spoke once in the past about what bracha Bnei Israel said over the man. And there are many different answers given. There are those who say the bracha, probably the most well-known, was Hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, and there are those who say they said Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, Borei pri ha'adama, she'akol. You've got the whole range. We saw once that it's actually brought in some of the tshuvot, contemporary tshuvot, that talk about hydroponic vegetables, which are grown in water and not grown from the ground. So would you still say the bracha of Borei pri ha'adama, or would you say she'akol? And there are those who invoke this discussion about what bracha was said on the man, maybe as a source for that. We've spoken about that previously. I'm not going to get into that today. But an interesting, maybe ashkafic sort of aspect of the man. When we think about it, so everybody knows money doesn't grow on trees, and food doesn't just fall from the sky. So this was for 40 years. Bnei Israel are in the midbar. They're in the desert where there is nothing. There's absolutely nothing. There's no food. There's no way it's going to come. And yet every morning the food falls from the sky. They get their food directly from heaven. What could be better than that? What could be more luxurious than that, right? You don't have to do anything. It's there. It comes straight to you. So we think of it naturally as a reward. We think of it as a luxury. We think of it as something good, at least. And yet the Torah tells a little bit of a different picture. It says, when it talks about the man, it says in the Pasha, it says, I'm sending you this man from heaven in order to test you. The man is a nisayon. It's an ordeal. It's a difficult thing that you have to go through. In fact, in Parashat Ekev, there it's written as well, again, this idea of Laman nasotcha, and it also says Laman anotcha. I'm sending you the man in order to afflict you. It's an inoi. That word we know, I'm sure everybody is thinking of it. That word inoi we know from Yom Kippur, right? V'nitem et nafshotechem erev ad erev. Where do we talk about an inoi? We talk about that on Yom Kippur, the 5 inuyim. You don't eat, you don't drink, you afflict yourself. An affliction is when you don't have food. Why are we saying when we do have food and we're getting it, the man is an affliction, it's an ordeal, it's an isayon, what's going on? It's exactly the opposite of what we might expect and what we might think it should be. So naturally, there's a lot to be said, and a lot of different explanations that are given in the Mefarshim. Whenever you have so many different answers, so it's a sign that the question is there's something difficult about it. But let's just briefly talk about three of the different answers that the Mefarshim give, again, to the question of why the man should be, although it seems to be something so luxurious and so good, it's actually an ordeal. It's actually, there's something I said. It's a nisayon, it's an ordeal, and it's an affliction. So the first thing is, Rashi, according to the Pshat, if you look at the words, it says, I'm going to test you if you go along, if you fulfill my Torah or not. So Rashi says in this case, it doesn't mean that the man is coming as a test whether you fulfill the entire Torah, all 613 mitzvot, like the seeds of the pomegranate or not, we saw last night. But the test is the Torah or the mitzvot that are associated specifically with the man, will you keep them? Right? In other words, the man fell down. It was a present gift from Shemaim every day. But there were certain limitations, and there were certain conditions and stipulations that were imposed on it. And we learn many halachot lemaaseh that we practice every week based on the man, things to do with Tchum Shabbat and things to do with Lechem Mishneh. Every Shabbat, every Friday night, and every Shabbat morning, we have 2 loaves of bread because there was a certain amount, a limited amount, which one could collect of the man every day. And the test was, would you try and be greedy and would you try and take more? You know, that if somebody tried to take more, it wouldn't help. It would all go wormy and moldy and whatever it is. It wouldn't benefit them. But on Shabbat, you couldn't go out and collect. And on Erev Shabbat, you had to go out and collect a double portion. So it's a strange thing. Every day, they were told, don't take any more. One day a week, actually take more. Go and take double. What happened on Yom Tov as well? Machloket in the Rishonim, whether on Yom Tov they went out to collect or not. And again, the nafkamina out of that would be, do we have Lechem Mishneh on Yom Tov, like we do on Shabbat? But practically speaking, we do. That's so the test is, so there was a certain amount you could collect, and there was a certain distance you could go to collect, and there was a certain time you could go to collect. And again, it's not just a free gift, but it's a free gift that comes with conditions, with stipulations, with mitzvot attached, with the Torah attached. And that, it says Rashi, that was the test, that was the ordeal of the man. You're getting this, you're getting what you need, but you have to keep the guidelines. You have to keep within the parameters. You have to keep the mitzvot. You have to do what is necessary, and that maybe is a prototype for ultimately, moving forward. So the man had a certain way in which it had to be achieved, and always when a person has to work for their parnassah and you have to achieve, you can't take shortcuts that are going to involve dishonesty and that are going to involve transgression, going to involve going against the way that the Torah commands. So that is number one. That is Rashi. Approach number 2. So this is found in a number of Mefarshim, the Sforno, or Chaim HaKadosh. I think the Kli Yakar says something similar as well. And I essentially say that the test and the ordeal of the man, yes, it was a luxury. And that was precisely the test. It was the test of luxury. It was the test of wealth, maybe. The Silat Yesharim says, there's in the introduction, that everything in life is a test. Whatever situation a person has, so sometimes people think the grass is always greener on the other side, but everything that you have, whatever set of circumstances, that comes to test you and has a certain set of challenges. There is a challenge of poverty and there is a challenge of wealth. Each one is different, but each one comes with its own test and comes with its own challenges. So a person who's wealthy, right, has the challenge of, what am I going to do with my resources? What am I going to do with my wealth? Where am I going to spend it? How am I going to spend it? To give to charitable causes or not, etc. In this case, so obviously they didn't have money left over. There was no, they couldn't sell it. They couldn't make any money from it. That wasn't the ordeal. But the ordeal was perhaps that the idea of the luxury is that they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to work. They didn't have to put in any effort for their parnassah. Again, nowadays, it's quite recent in human history that the concept of free time comes about. Because beforehand, people were working in agricultural society, farmers, etc., from morning to evening, working very, very hard in order to make a living, in order to make a sustenance, and you don't have free time. So in the Midbar, when they have all the free time in the world, yes, they had to go out, they had to collect it once a day in the morning, and once they have it, and that's it. What are they going to do with the rest of the time? You have all day to sit in kollel and learn. Right? You have all day to invest your time, your energy, your resources in the things that matter. You have the opportunity to prove that the things that you say matter to you actually do matter to you by doing that and spending the time. We always say, we don't have time. We don't have time. We're too busy for everything. So the test here was, okay, you won't be too busy. You'll have this. Also, think about the fact that in the Midbar, most of the time, of those 40 years, a large proportion of that time, they weren't moving, they weren't walking, they were just, the cloud was down and they were where they were. And they were, they had what to do. So they only had to, there was no work. They had a free pass. This essentially is the same idea of Shemitah. There are many, many parallels between the idea between Shabbat and Shemitah and the idea of not having to go out and not having to work. In the Shemitah year, once every 7, the farmer has his sabbatical. He doesn't have to work. He can't work. What are you going to do with the time? Are you going to spend it wisely? Are you going to spend it in the right way? So that, according to those Mefarshim, is the ordeal. The ordeal of the man. Maybe we could say the challenge is the challenge of wealth and the challenge of luxury and the challenge of free time, essentially. And then opinion number 3 is the opinion of the Ramban. The Ramban says exactly the opposite. Not that it's the challenge of luxury, not that it's the challenge of wealth, but it's the challenge of poverty, in a sense. What does he mean? So Chazal tell us, somebody who has bread in his basket is comfortable, his mind is at ease. Somebody who doesn't is not. So we started off saying, and we always think, wow, the money is growing on trees, right? It's falling from the sky. For 40 years, they have the mann that's coming down. Miraculously, they've got their food. They're never missing anything. They only collect what they need for that day. The next day, it's going to fall again. Think about it from another perspective here. If I can only collect what I need for that day, means I don't have any spare. I don't have anything in reserve. And where is the one place on earth that you don't want to be when you don't have anything in reserve? Probably the desert, where there is nothing. There is nothing. So there's no food. How many of us would be able to withstand that challenge? There's no food in the fridge. There's no food in the fridge. There's no food in the supermarket. There's no food in the farm. There's no food anywhere. There's nothing in the credit card. There's nothing in the bank account. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You go to sleep. You don't know what's going to be in the next morning. Now, they knew what was going to be the next morning because they had the mann, and it happened every day, right? But there must have been, at some point, a question in the back of one's mind, which is, what if? Okay, so, we're in the desert, but what if tomorrow it doesn't fall? Then what do we do? Right? And we've seen complaints throughout the desert. And in this sense, this test, I think it might be fair to say that they passed it with flying colors, despite all the difficulties and despite all the complaints that we do find. And we read about all the complaints. Remember, 40 years in the desert. We only hear about a few episodes here and there, but most of the time, things were going. Things were maybe going okay. What's amazing? Rav Chaim Shmulevitz points something out about this ordeal. He says that everything depends on perspective. He says that the same thing. Again, what are we saying? The idea here is that they were absolutely dependent on Hashem each day anew. I had nothing left over. I have to have complete emunah, complete faith that I've got nothing. I can't do anything. And I'm going to go to sleep not knowing where my next meal will come from. So in the Tochacha, it says, Vayu chayecha tluim lecha mineged, which the Mepharshim explain means exactly the same thing. Your life will be dependent on you. You're going to go to sleep. You're not going to know what you have next. So says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, it's exactly the same thing, the same existence, the same reality is in the mann, in the midbar, and it's in the tochacha as well. It's the same thing that it can be Gan Eden or it can be Gehinom, but it depends on your perspective, and it depends on how you view it. And that, he says, that is the ordeal over here. That is the ordeal of emunah, of faith, of knowing that, yes, it's all coming from heaven, but will it come again? Wake up the next morning. And it's an amazing thing for 40 years, day in, day out, every night to go to sleep, not knowing what's coming next and not being able to leave anything over. That is according to the Ramban, that was the test. I'll just say one more word about this idea of perspective, which comes up again in the parsha, what Shmulevitz points out. So the Midrash says something frightening. There's a pasuk in Tehillim, it says, Vayamru al yam vayam suf. Says that they rebelled in the sea. And the Midrash says gives the following story. It says, Reuven and Shimon are crossing through the Yam Suf. And they turn to each other and they say, this is just like Egypt. There's no difference. In Egypt there was mud, and here there's mud. In Egypt there was the mud and the clay we were using to make bricks, and now we're crossing through the sea and we're crossing through the seabed, and there's mud. There's mud on our feet, and there's mud on our shoes, and there's mud all over. Can you imagine such a thing? They're walking through the sea. The sea has split for them. Kriyat Yam Suf, the prototype of miracles. And they're complaining that they've got mud on their shoes. You're walking through the sea. What do you think's going to happen? That's what the Midrash says. Again, if Midrash didn't say it, I would never have imagined it could be. But that is that idea of perspective. That is what he's telling us. It can be Gan Eden, it can be Gehinnom, but you have to find. Obviously, there are certain things in life that are not Gan Eden. Everybody knows that. But there are certain things which depends how we look at it, and that's how it affects us. So those are some of the ways that the Mefarshim understand what the reward, what the challenge, what the difficulty of the man is, and how they apply to our lives as well. B'Chananya ben Akash Omer, Tzakadosh Baruch Hu lezakot Yisrael, lefichach b'alem Torah mitzvot, shnei Amadonai chafetz man zivko yagdir Torah v'yadir.